Good morning. Welcome to this month's edition of our third. Good morning. Let me start all over. Good morning. Welcome to this month's edition of Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation Third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat. I am Bettina Campbell, and I am the Social Service Coordinator and a Medicaid CHIP Assister for Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation, which is the parent corporation for Healthy Kids Mississippi. Joining us today also is our Technology and Metrics Director, Mr. Thomas Duke Robinson. We recognize our Board Chair, Jennifer Garrett, and our Project Director, Lottie Miner. In addition to this Zoomcast, we are restreaming today's webinars on our Oak Hill Regional CDC and Healthy Kids Mississippi Facebook pages. Okay, so please feel free to share your social media pages also. So health observances for the month of March include National Colorectal Cancer, National Nutrition Month, NBC USA Hope Kidney Fund Kidney Sunday, American Kidney Fund Kidney Sunday, which was March the 3rd, World Kidney Day, National Women and Girls HIV/AIDS Awareness Day, which was March the 10th, and last Sunday, our Taste Test Sunday, it was March 16th, and finally, our American Diabetes Association Diabetes Alert Day, yet to happen on March the 27th. As always, all of these awareness days that we talk about are important, and you should try to learn as much as you can about them, and especially if you have yourself or your family members are infected or affected by any of these disorders or diseases. So today though, we are going to talk about alcoholism, or I should say the new term alcohol disorder, and the try to help you become more aware of some of the effects of alcohol. So and especially we're looking at how alcohol affects children of parents who are who misuse or abuse alcohol. And so what we want to talk about today is we are always talking about the legal and social implications or effects. Today, we're going to talk more about the medical and genetic effects of this disorder on individuals and their families. So before we begin our presentation, I want to again encourage you to please share on your social media pages, and to please make sure that you have your pencil and paper ready to write down any questions or concerns that you might have so that we can answer them during our Q&A session. So, according to Dr. Charles Hennigan, who's an MD, alcohol is the leading avoidable cause of premature deaths and disabilities in the United States. In addition, children of parents with alcohol misuse or abuse face significant risks, such as mental health problems, behavioral issues, academic difficulties, and then there's a greater likelihood that they themselves may develop substance use disorders. It's also a factor in many of our diseases, which includes high blood pressure, stroke, and breast and prostate cancer. So guess what? Back with us today is Dr. Don Vereen, who is going to help us to understand these issues better. And Dr. Vereen is currently the director of the University of Michigan Substance Abuse Research Center. He is a public health psychiatrist who directs community-based research activities and public health research in such areas as drug abuse, addiction, mental health, violence, and HIV and AIDS at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. He is a native Mississippian. He hails from Biloxi, and he's very proud of that fact. But Dr. Vereen earned his AB degree from Harvard College, an MD from Tufts University School of Medicine, and an MPH from Harvard School of Public Health. And from 1998 to 2002, he served as the Deputy Drug Czar under Presidents Clinton and Bush, where he oversaw community-based prevention efforts, the National Youth Anti-Drug Media Campaign, and the introduction of a new drug treatment approach in the United States. He also engaged in the United States efforts to establish a World Anti-Doping Agency. He returned to the National Institutes of Health to oversee the efforts to bring power to research to bear on such areas as child abuse and neglect, health disparities, and developing new clinical research strategies. And that's how I met him, the developing new community research strategies piece of his work. And so we want to say welcome, Dr. Vereen, and thank you for always being so ready and willing to help us to provide health information to our community. Welcome.
Good morning, and it's a real pleasure to be here again, and happy to have a dialogue with you today about alcohol and alcoholism. So I have prepared a few words and a few visuals, but let me just share for a second a bit of my assignment from Ms. Tina for today, and what I'd like to share with you in a way so that we understand what's going on better with alcohol and alcohol use. And first and foremost, want to be able to answer your questions or at least have a discussion about some of the things that relate to alcohol use that you have questions about, that you're troubled about, that you need to understand better in order, for you to be able to move forward. So let me go ahead and share my screen, because I don't want to take up too much time. I'd much rather have a dialogue with you. There we go. Nothing is showing up on the screen, right?
Right.
Oh, there we go. How about now?
Yes. You just need to start it from the beginning.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Something's happening very slowly. I think that's what's throwing me off. Are we okay now?
Yes, now we are.
Okay. We see a young man. You all have seen this a photo before. It really does capture our getting used to the acceptance that we all have mental health issues, and we can help each other with those mental health issues. And as hard as it is to open up and talk, that's really what's important here. You've also seen this slide before. What I'm attempting to do today is, yes, the topic is alcohol abuse, alcohol use rather. But this is not actually a new topic. We're going to focus on alcohol, but all the other things that I've shared in the past about mental health, mental illness, how our mental lives work is the same. And I just want to reiterate that what we feel and experience is a result of our environment. Our environment can make us depressed, it can make us happy. our psychology, our own makeup, our own baggage, to use a 1960s term, and our biology. Now, if you notice on this slide, I said this backwards, and it's because I want to put a different kind of emphasis on the biology. I want you to get comfortable with thinking that anytime there is an issue related to our mental health, do not forget that there is a biology involved that is represented and intimately involved with our psychology and our environment. So I'll always come back to that point. Oh, I did want to leave this a slide in. You've seen this slide before when we were talking about aspects of mental illness and mental health as it relates to COVID and what COVID was doing to us psychologically and socially. And one of the ways we measure that effect is by looking at things like mental illness. You know, when you reach that extreme point of being ill in a mental, quote unquote, mental sense. 1 in 5 adults experiences a mental illness each year. The majority of those illnesses are depression or some aspect or some type of depression. That's the most common mental illness. Some people will say, oh, it's probably an anxiety disorder. That may or may not be true, but the anxiety and the depression, they go together. But most of what we're seeing is depression. And the reason I'm bringing that up today is alcohol is the #1 treatment by all of us, Black, white, male, female, American, not American, the #1 self-treatment for depression. So I want to lay that point out there as we move on. I always want to make sure we don't forget about the biological aspect of things. We tend to be much more comfortable talking about the social. And while it's not on this Venn diagram, political, it's easier for us as social creatures, God's social creatures, to think socially and politically. But that's not all that's going on. Our social environment, how we behave within that environment, is dictated by our own personal psychologies and our own personal biologies. So there are a lot of things going on at the same time. And this slide is meant to remind us that all these things are going on as we talk about the topic of alcohol and alcohol use. To drive home the point about biology and a little bit about psychology, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about alcohol if we didn't have a brain. We wouldn't be concerned about some of our relatives and friends who misbehave when they've had a little bit too much alcohol. Or we wonder or wish that some people wouldn't drink as much because they'd be nicer people. They wouldn't be as violent. They wouldn't be as angry. All of that we're concerned about, what we observe and see, is because all of us have brains and we are watching behavior. We're judging behavior. We're experiencing behavior that is a result of alcohol on our brains. The alcohol gets into the brain like any other drug. So yes, alcohol is a drug. It is a drug of abuse. It gets in like any other drug, and it affects how our brain works. It affects how we think about reward and punishment. It affects our memory. We'll chat a bit later about blackouts. Blackouts are a loss of memory and a loss of the ability to make memories. That's one of the special things that alcohol does. It also helps us to remember where we can get alcohol, and the places that made us happiest when we were using the alcohol. And all of those social, psychological issues are a part of what plays into addiction. Most importantly, and we all know this when we use the word tipsy, and most of us have felt that experience, when you're feeling a little tipsy, you're a little bit disinhibited. There are very complex brain structures in the front of your head that tell you, you know, maybe you shouldn't do that. Or I'm feeling a little bit too good right now. I'm going to go do this anyway. That in the cartoons, when you have that little devil sitting on your shoulder, keeping that little devil at bay is what's referred to in this slide, marked inhibitory control. And science has taught us that there are some very, very specific parts of the brain that work together that help us to not do or not behave badly. The other thing I want to sort of introduce, based on the earlier discussion I had with Mrs. Campbell, is the whole issue of genetics. And when I say genetics, I'm not meaning that you're destined, that there's something in the chemistry of your genes that's going to make you do something. Genes are actually not really like that. Genes are constantly interacting with their environment, where those genes are and the environment that surrounds them. Not unlike our brains. We each have a brain, but that brain, and listen to this carefully, our brains are constantly negotiating between our environment and ourselves, our psychological selves and our biological selves. And genes are the same. Just because you have a brain doesn't mean you're going to use it appropriately. Just it doesn't mean that you're the smartest person in the world. Also doesn't mean you're the dumbest person in the world. But your brain is constantly negotiating between the outside and the inside. And the genes are the same way. They're constantly interacting with our environment. They do tilt things a certain way. And so when you hear the word gene, it's not destiny. Genes provide a predisposition, a slant, a tweak in a certain direction. And some of those directions are stronger than others. So again, I want to show some evidence. The meaning of the evidence, we can have a debate about. But on the left, you see a person with a brain like most of ours. It's got all those deep, valleys and crevices on the outside. By the way, that's what makes us so smart. If we had smooth brains on the outside, we would look like lizards. So what makes us smart are all those valleys and crevices filled with liquid, with cerebral spinal fluid. That's why it's black in this slide. And if you take a look at the so-called alcoholic brain in this slide, you will see that there are just some major differences. And perhaps you would even say it doesn't look as attractive. It's not as symmetrical. There aren't the sharp edges. If you look at the two big areas in the middle that are filled with fluid, they've lost some definition. The outsides are smoother. There aren't as many of the crevices. Some of them have gotten really, really big. Those crevices and openings. That this tells us that there has been brain change. I didn't say brain damage. I said brain change. Alcohol in high concentration does kill brain cells, but it has to be at a very, very, very high level. Alcohol does change brains. And for people, most of us, if you've used and overused for a long time, you'll be able to exercise your brain back to the way it looks on the left side of this slide. Briefly, the things that alcohol does to us is a reflection of where in the brain it's acting on. So I mentioned the frontal lobes where we make good judgments about what's good behavior and what's bad behavior, or our self-control. That's when we lose that, it means the alcohol is affecting this part of the brain. The middle part of the brain, if you take your tongue and touch the roof of your mouth, the part of the brain that's just above that, that's where all of the information about our emotions, our memory, feeling good, feeling bad, all of that is controlled or coordinated in that part of the brain. And when we lose control of our emotions, when we lose our ability to remember or even have joy, because people will tell you after they've been using alcohol for many years and have become addicted, they don't really feel any joy anymore. It's because that part of the brain has been affected. And then when you see people stumbling around, you see people not able to control their speech. That's all because the alcohol is affecting the lower back part of the head. If you lift up your head, you'll feel two pillars in the back. Right behind those muscles is the cerebellum. And that's where alcohol is affecting your ability to walk straight. So I found this a couple days ago, and I'm going to leave it here because, as usual, you're welcome to the slides. You're able to you're free to look at them at some point in the future. But to map out what happens with alcohol use and the slow downward kind of spiral that you get in when you start drinking more and more and more, trying to solve your problems and your feelings with more and more alcohol, you begin to see that you have a tolerance to the alcohol because you need more of it to feel the same effect. You may elicit certain behaviors. Some of us get really sleepy if we drink too much. Some of us get really violent and are very unpleasant if we drink too much. We find that we can't stop. We're not ourselves anymore. We're drinking constantly, partly because if we stop, we'll withdraw. There is a withdrawal with alcohol that happens to be very deadly. It's called delirium tremens, the DTs. 1 out of 5 people who experiences the DTs and does not seek or is in medical care dies. It's a deadly withdrawal. Unlike opiate withdrawal, nobody dies from that. It's horrible. It feels bad, makes you feel really, really bad, but nobody dies from opiate withdrawal, believe it or not. But 1 out of 5 people dies from the DTs untreated. And then once you reach that sort of rock bottom and you're on your way out, you'll see certain behaviors. You'll see and feel certain revelations as you're coming out of and growing out of the effects that the alcohol has had on your body, your brain, your psychological life, and the environment that you ended up polluting with your drinking behavior. So I'm gonna stop with that. I hit you with a bunch of different thoughts, concepts, things to take into account. And now let's have your questions. Let's have your comments about some of what I presented. You don't necessarily have to have a question, but something may have struck a chord with you, or something may have rubbed you the wrong way, that's not what you experienced. And let's have a dialogue and learn from each other at this point. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other.
Thank you, Dr. Vereen, for the very insightful information. And I'm going to start with some questions that revolved around the conversation that we had most recently, and it was around these terms that we use as lay people to try to figure out what's going on or to impress upon somebody that the behavior may not be all that they think it should be when they are drinking. And so one of the questions you talked about, we talked about was dry drunk. So what is a dry drunk, and what are some of the characteristics of a dry drunk?
Well, the dry drunk, the term suggests that someone is drunk, and dry is a descriptor of the drunk. Dry referring to not drinking. So there are some states that are dry on Sunday. You can't buy alcohol on Sunday. That's where the dry comes from. A dry drunk, so to speak, is someone who acts drunk, but they've not had anything to drink. This can happen in a couple of different scenarios. If I'm remembering correctly, the AA community came up with this term when they were noticing people in AA acting as if they were drunk. They were mean, they were sleepy, they were anxious, they were depressed. They were acting as if they were under the influence of alcohol, but they hadn't had anything to drink. And so that's what that phenomenon is. And so there's a biology to that. If you've been drinking for a long time, you remember the slide I showed you of the brain where the edges are a little smoother. That's what you see in a depressed brain. A person with depression, there ain't much happening on the edges of the brain that make us alive, believe it or not. And so there's a biology to explain that. People anticipate when you're taking a drug and you're missing it, you anticipate taking the drug. You anticipate having a drink, even though you're swearing off, you're in your AA meeting, you're with people who are going to make sure you're not going to drink, but you're thinking about it. And that thinking about it can trigger all of the behaviors of actually drinking. I didn't include any slides here because I don't have any for alcohol, but I do for heroin and cocaine. They're most robust for cocaine. You can put somebody in a brain scanner and give them cocaine and watch where the cocaine goes in the brain and watch their brain light up in certain ways, and they'll tell you, oh, I'm high. But you can see that same brain firing pattern if you suggest that you're about to give someone the cocaine, and that anticipation makes the brain fire as if, oh yeah, I'm there, I'm ready. And the same thing can happen with alcohol. Just thinking about it, pretending that it's in your mouth, and the behaviors that go along with the use can't be separated out from that use. So that's a fuzzy description, but probably the most accurate description of what dry drunk is, because we all experience it differently. But it's your brain being affected by someone who wants the alcohol, and then they're acting as if they actually had it.
So I think you described two things there. You described a person dry drunk, but you also talked about the anticipatory drunk. So it's easy to see that there's a lot going on in our brains that we don't even think about that influences whether or not we overdrink, or even after we overdrink, our behaviors and our thoughts.
Yes, and let me
and
add
actions.
one other point to your point, which you were nicely describing there. So when you see someone, let's say they're in an AA meeting and they're sullen, they're mean, they're nasty, they're not being very collegial, that is a direct effect of the alcohol on the brain, on the person's brain. And you see that until they've recovered up to a certain point, when that tends to go away, because that part of the brain that makes you look angry and makes you look depressed recovers, goes back to normal. So
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
no,
Dr.
go
Green.
ahead. No, go ahead.
That leads me to another question, though. I have experienced that people that maybe with just one drink,
Okay.
they
Yes.
they are actually going to be falling down, stumbling down, drunk.
Yes. Very good question, as usual. See, I want you on my team, Miss Bettina. What you are describing is a very important biological and genetic issue, because that doesn't happen to everybody. Some people are actually hypersensitive to alcohol. It takes a small amount And it's as if I haven't been drunk since I was 20. And it only took about 5 or 6 drinks. But there are people who can drink a case of beer in a sitting. And there are others that can get drunk on just 1 or 2 beers. That's because their liver cannot digest the alcohol. And that is based on your genes. Now, Asian, you know how some people have a flush with wine? You know, they get a headache or they get red. Many of those people, they'll get drunk very quickly. And that's a reflection of the alcohol getting into your stomach, and then everything in your stomach goes through your liver before it goes out to the rest of your body. And you have an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. And if you've only got 1 or 2 of those little alcohol dehydrogenase molecules, you're not going to be able to process much alcohol. So that means the alcohol goes through the liver undigested. And that means more of it gets to the brain and affects you so that you're drunk, or in ways before you're drunk. But it does affect your brain. The alcohol dehydrogenase gets overwhelmed after you've had a whole case of beer, but there are people who are born with very little alcohol dehydrogenase. Let me give a parallel example. People who are lactose intolerant are born without the enzyme that breaks down milk sugar, lactose. They're born with that. Some people acquire it. I can explain that later on, but they're born with the inability to make that enzyme. And so they inherit that from their parents, and then they have to learn over time to avoid the milk or to take things that will give them that enzyme. So that's what you're seeing there. You're seeing people being hypersensitive. And since we're talking about this, and I mentioned genetics, how many of you like gin? I don't. It is just too bitter for me. But do you know there are some people, they love the flavor of gin. It's like Kool-Aid. Again, that's probably genetic. It means that the coding for their taste buds are such that the juice from the sloe berry that gin comes from, when it interacts with your tongue, that chemical reaction based on your genes gives a signal of cherry Kool-Aid instead of nasty acid. And that can predispose you to drink. If you taste that bitter tasting alcohol and it tastes like Kool-Aid, you'll keep downing it faster than your liver can process it. And that's why you get drunk from that. That's why some people may be predisposed to becoming alcohol users and addicted to alcohol, is because they're set up because of their taste buds, or they're set up because they only need a little bit to get them drunk. And so all they need, they don't have to spend much money and go to a party and they're already high from that one drink. And that's what predisposes them. And that's, again, why it's important to understand genetics and the biology and how it can be different in each of us and predispose us in different ways, because this is a very complicated, it's a very complicated thing. And it is not, let me make this point, it's not a moral failing. Addiction to any substance is not a moral failing.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that. Thank you very much. And I'm gonna do one more, and then I'm gonna open it up for questions from everyone. And I will get to a question that I see in the chat. But you mentioned blackouts. What is an
Yes.
alcohol blackout, and how long can a person be in that state?
A blackout is when you lose all memory of what's happening to you, or it's not being able to create a memory. So we're talking to each other right now, and I'm while all of this is happening and I'm interacting with you, I am making a bit of a videotape of what's happening. I'm setting down memory. That process, which is very biological, by the way, is disrupted. So you'll be doing something. You'll be driving under the influence of alcohol or not. Sometimes there isn't much alcohol there and you're not able to make any memories. And so you can't remember. You remember getting in the car and you realize, oh, I'm at the grocery store. But because you didn't lay down your ability to make memories of your driving to the grocery store is impaired by the alcohol use, you don't know how you got there. It's like you wake up from sleep. Because in sleep, you're not making any memories. You may be dredging up memories, but when you're asleep, you're not making memories. You're not remembering anything. You might remember what the inside of your eyelid looks like. But most of us, we're not there. We're not making memories. So that's what the blackouts are. It's your inability to make memories caused by usually a high level of alcohol use. You have to use over a certain period of time, and you have to use a certain amount, and that varies from person to person. And you create these periods where you don't have any memories, and you wake up or you don't remember. And somebody's been telling you, hey, you know, why did you hit your kids so hard? Why did you hit your wife? I didn't hit her. Well, you did. I have it on video, but they have no memory of it. So that's what a blackout is. It's a biological process that is prompted by alcohol use. It has to be alcohol use at a certain level, which varies from person to person. And it has to happen after a period of time of pretty regular high alcohol use.
How long could a person be in that state?
Sometimes for days, maybe even longer. I've had patients who went for days not knowing what happened to them. They're able to function, you know, they might be able to go to sleep. They go to the bathroom, because that's something you don't have to remember. Something tells you have to go to the bathroom. They can do stuff, but it can last for days. And
Okay.
it's a scary thing. And
Yeah.
again, this is it varies from person to person, and it's the concept that I want you to get familiar with, because for me as a psychiatrist, somebody comes in and a relative brings in, a wife brings in a husband and says, you know, doc, he's not been himself for 2 weeks. Do blackouts last for 2 weeks? They very well could be, but you got to know about the concept to think about it. You know, is he a drinker? Did he do this? Did he fall and hit his head? Because falling and hitting your head can cause anamnesia where you lose your memory. Some people hit their heads and they're not able to create memories. When you have Alzheimer's disease, there's a part of the frontal lobe that connects to your hippocampus, which is the part of the brain most responsible for making memories, and you're not making memories anymore. And just as a review, with Alzheimer's, you have a short-term memory and you have a long-term memory. And it's the shorter-term memory that goes first in people with Alzheimer's. So the more recent events and things, people forget. It's like the memory of what just happened isn't there. Alcohol can do the same thing. It just prevents you from making the memory in the first place, as opposed to you having the memory and it going away. So with Alzheimer's, it's like having recent blackout. And the blackout goes back earlier and earlier. And that's why I'm introducing the concept of what blackouts are, but what it is in terms of memory, and losing it, and memory not being able to form it.
Wow.
Because all those are important, because the concepts overlap. We can talk about blackouts, you know, when it comes to people with Alzheimer's, but it's a different process. And that's what I want you to get used to, is thinking in those terms, because many of these topics are so complicated. Alcohol use is so complicated. It isn't just one thing. It isn't just DUIs. It isn't just having seizures. I mean, another thing that alcohol use does is it lowers your seizure threshold. So people with seizures, if you're not taking your medicine, alcohol lowers the point at which your brain starts having the seizure activity.
Okay, so I'm going to stop right there. I have a lot more, but I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to start taking questions from social media, and also so you put your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. If you're on Zoom, you can feel free to open up your mic and we can answer them. But Dr. Vereen, we certainly thank you. You've given us a lot to think about. I'm learning a lot, and we shared a lot today. And so I'm hoping that people will take away this information and use it as they need it in their daily lives. Now, one of the questions from social media says, if a mother ingests alcohol during pregnancy, will that also predispose the unborn child to alcohol effects?
The answer to that question is a yes. But let me say this. It depends on how much alcohol is drunk, how much, how fast. Let me go back to what I was saying before about ingesting alcohol, or any food for that matter. And by the way, I did make a point that alcohol is a drug of abuse. What is so complicated about alcohol use, how we think about it, and alcohol policy is that it is also a food. It is a legitimate part of our diet. It has calories. It's mostly sugar. So when a pregnant woman takes in alcohol, if she were to take a sip of her husband's wine at a dinner, that probably would have no effect because the amount of alcohol that she's taking in, first of all, it dissolves. It's like a sugar. Some of it is kind of digested a little bit by your saliva. It goes down into your stomach and then into your small intestines and then is absorbed by the liver. Alcohol dehydrogenase, it's a specific enzyme that digests alcohol. All of that sip was probably eaten up and digested by the liver. None of it made it into the bloodstream, and none of it, therefore, made it to the baby. Does that make sense? So the more a pregnant woman drinks over a period of time and the amount, it depends on those things. If a woman takes a sip every other day, that's, quite frankly, that is not going to have an effect on the fetus. Okay? But if a woman has her usual, some women have a couple of glasses of wine a day, would that be enough to affect the fetus? Because I'm hesitating here, the hesitation says we shouldn't be taking that risk. The woman may be born with lots of alcohol dehydrogenase and can drink that amount of alcohol and none of it is slowly enough and none of it gets to the baby. Or she might be an Aleutian from Alaska or some other Native American, and one drink is enough for her to be drunk, and that alcohol is constantly in the system and being deposited in the fetus. Yes, it can have an effect. And can the baby handle it? Depends on how well developed that liver is. If it's a very young fetus, there isn't much of a liver there. If you're 8 months, 9 months pregnant, there's a pretty robust liver functioning. So the baby may be able to handle and neutralize some of that alcohol. Now, for babies who are exposed to lots of alcohol by their mothers while they were in utero, there is a fetal alcohol syndrome where the most sort of obvious effect is the alcohol actually has an effect on how the face is formed in these babies. And you'll see these eyes that are pretty spread apart. You'll see flattened noses. You'll see this look, and I'm not being offensive here, but this is you'll see babies that look what is referred to as mongoloid. They look more Asian because of the flatter face. The racial classifications as they were described by a bunch of white people, but there's an aspect of it that's true. You have Mongoloids, Negroids, and Caucasoids. People from the Caucasian mountains, people from Africa, were the Negroes, and the Far Easterners, the Mongoloids. There's something about the facial features that looks more Mongoloid. And the babies may also have some brain challenges as well. So it's not, and by the way, the person who is responsible for making sure that we understood and so that we could give answers to the question that was just asked about the dangers of alcohol to babies, we should be giving credit to, and I just lost her name, a Black woman at NIH. She worked at the National Institute for Alcohol and Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse, NIAAA, for something like 20 years. She single-handedly created a research program on fetal alcohol syndrome. And most of what we know to this day is because of that research program that she set up at NIH, a Black woman who now lives in North Carolina.
Wow.
Yep. So people, some of us in research are following up on the very kinds of questions that you are asking.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions off social media?
There's one in the QA portion of Zoom. So the brain can be conditioned to work a certain way according to the stimulus that becomes habitual, even if all you hear is there's liquor nearby.
Yes. And a quick answer to that, if you remember a picture of the brain with the different centers, pleasure, inhibition, inhibitory, what you're seeing there are changes in the brain that change our judgment, our value system, such that it's like I'm gonna tell on my wife. She sees a piece of chocolate and it's like, oh my gosh, I have to have that. I'm so excited. I really want that. And we're all conditioned like that. And what alcohol does is it contributes to a process that does train us to keep doing the not so good behavior of drinking the alcohol. That's part of what happens in addiction. The use of the drug over and over again, and usually it's multiple drugs. Most people who are using cocaine, heroin, etc., are also using alcohol, by the way. So there are multiple addictions going on, but they all change the brain in a certain way. That's why people with cocaine addiction and alcohol addiction, when you look at their activity, the same pattern exists. And there are aspects of that pattern that could explain what was just being asked in this question. It'll train your brain to react a certain way, to promote that use until you enter recovery and retrain that part of the brain.
Wow, we've learned a lot today, Dr. Vereen. Thank you for sharing so much and for being with us. But unfortunately, now it's time for me to start reminding people about upcoming events and to say goodbye for the day. So we want to ask, again, before we do that, I want to remind everyone to please share this information on your social media pages because it is important information that people need to hear, and it may change someone's life. So again, we ask you to please share. Now, I want to remind you that Ask Mary and Pat, which is our Zoom webinar, is at 6 p.m. Monday, March the 24th. Let's Talk Real Estate with Area Mays is 11 a.m. Thursday, March 27th. And our next third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat, we'll be having it during the Minority Health Month, which is April. And we will have it Wednesday, April the 16th. And we will be talking about understanding why it's important to highlight minority health. So we invite you, please come back and join us, and encourage family and friends to join us, because this is information that we are sharing because we want you to have a healthier, happier life. So you may learn more about us at www.oakhillregionalcdc.com and www.healthykidsmississippi.org. Once again, we acknowledge our board chair, Jennifer Garrett, and our executive director, Dr. Michael O. Minor. This has been a production of the Oak Hill Community Development Corporation, belonging, building, and bridging in the Mid-South. and across the state of Mississippi. For those of you who are on social media, I'll say, other than Zoom, I'll say goodbye and you have a blessed day. For those of you who are on Zoom, please stay around for a few minutes for additional questions. And while we wrap up, Dr. Vereen will be staying with us. So we look forward to entertaining any questions that you might have, additional questions that you might have. Again, have a blessed day.